Hey everybody, James Introcaso here. Before we get started with this week's episode, I wanted to take a moment and let you know I am super excited to welcome the podcast Dames and Dragons to the Don't Split the Podcast family. It is an excellent actual play podcast that has been running for a little while, and they just joined the network. Super excited to share. It is a funny, great group of people who are in this podcast. They will entertain you. So if you like actual plays, check this one out for sure. In fact, let's hear an ad from them right now.
Oh man, I really want to experience the magic of Dungeons and Dragons, but I'm a cave hermit who made an oath never to speak to other people again.
And I want to watch a classic fantasy series like Lord of the Rings or Game of Thrones, but I can't stand the sight of human faces.
Well, I want to relive the magic of make-believe, the humor of a preschool-age child, and the genuine camaraderie of nearly 10 years of friendship through only my ears, but I don't know how.
You ignorant fools! You don't even know about Dames and Dragons!
What? But Dames and Dragons? What's that?
Dames and Dragons is a Dungeons and Dragons actual play podcast.
A podcast? So I can experience the spontaneous group storytelling of D&D without breaking my oath of solitude?
That's right.
And I can take part in a rich fantasy storyline without ever having to lay eyes on a disgusting human face?
Never again will the faces plague you.
And it has a cast of 4 female friends who make constant immature jokes as they play?
Absolutely. I would never lead you astray, my friend. Whether you love D&D or just love a good fantasy tale, Dames and Dragons is the podcast for you. Tells the story of 3 unlikely heroes who are chosen to become guardians of the goddess of their world, a floating island by the name of Estra.
By God, that sounds like something I could get into.
Sounds like something I'd love.
Sounds like something I'd make.
Well, that's just ridiculous. Dames and Dragons, updated every second Monday wherever podcasts are sold.
This is Tabletop Babble. I'm James Introcaso. This week on the show, I am talking with Dillon and Teos Abadia, 2 great game designers who love 5th edition D&D, and we are talking all about the Unearthed Arcana DM's Guild releases of the Artificer and Mystic classes. So Wizards of the Coast has just put these things out on the DM's Guild. They are still in playtest mode. We're going to get into why all of that is in just a moment. But for now, let's jump in with them. Okay, everybody, I'm here with 2 game designers and 2 of my favorite people in the entire world, Dillon and Teos Abadia. Guys, welcome to Tabletop Babble. It is a pleasure to have you here. Dillon, who are you and what do you do in the world of tabletop role-playing games?
Hey, well, thanks for having me on again. It's always a blast to be here, James. So, I'm Dillon. I'm a freelance game designer. I have done quite a bit of work for a pretty big scattershot of third-party publishers for both 5th edition D&D and for Pathfinder. Rogue Genius Games, Wright Publishing, Legendary Games, Playground Adventures for kid and family-friendly stuff. But probably my biggest body of work is going to be through Kobold Press. I'm doing pretty much exclusively 5e work there now, an awful lot with the Midgard campaign setting upcoming later this year. Very excited about that.
That's really, really fun. I can't wait to get my hands on that Midgard campaign setting. I'm a big fan of your work, Dan. You've been on this podcast before. You were on the Roundtable many times, so it's great to have you back. And then first time on Tabletop Babble, but certainly not our first time podcasting together. Teos Abadia, welcome. It is great to have you here, man. Oh, and actually, This is not your first Tabletop Babble either. I misspoke. You were on with Rob Schwab. So, who are you and what do you do in the world of tabletop role-playing games?
I have been working primarily with organized play since the early 2000s. And through organized play, began to work more and more closely with Wizards of the Coast as a freelancer. I've done a little work for other companies as well, but primarily been working with Wizards on adventures. And the adventures include things like game days, like Vault of the Dracolich, and special events like Cloud Giant's Bargain for last year's support of Acquisitions Incorporated. And the latest thing that I've just finished doing and can now talk about is that I was one of the authors again for the D&D Open, which is D&D's big competitive, but not really competitive event that takes place first at Origins and then at other conventions. And so the whole point is tons of people in a room, multi-table event, having a really crazy dungeon that is very challenging, but fun regardless of how good you are. And while there are winners, the winners can be not just who did best, but also last year we had, who had a TPK the quickest and things like that can get you a special sort of unlock. Every year we change up what causes these sort of achievements to trigger.
Yes, absolutely. I think, Teos, you write some of the most fun adventures that are out there. So people should definitely check out your work. Adamantine Chef, I think, gets a special call out as one of the most fun adventures.
Thanks. I really appreciate that. What I love doing, and the reason I keep writing adventures, is I love to try to create that the words that are going to cause both the DM and the players to do fun, wacky stuff.
Absolutely. And I just saw that they are giving copies of Cloud Giant's Bargain away to their Stream of Annihilation streamers. We're recording this the day before the stream goes live. And so they must think highly of your work to be giving it out as swag to some internet famous people who are going to be
That's really cool.
Thanks for saying that. It's funny. You introduced me as a game designer, and I still kind of don't quite get it through my head. Though I am increasingly trying to do more and more. So it must somehow be true. It's amazing and a real honor.
Yeah, well, it is great to have you both here. And another reason I like to have both of you on for this is you're 5e designers, experts, but you also both play in addition to running 5th edition games. And today we're talking about two classes that are sort of new. They've been in Unearthed Arcana a couple times, and now they're finally on the DM's Guild. And we'll talk about the implications of that in a moment. But the Artificer and the Mystic, which is a catch-all psionic class for 5th edition, are now on the DM's Guild because they want them to have a really wide reach. They want them to reach a lot of people, and they want DM's Guild creators to be able to play with these classes. We should mention they're free. They're linked over at don'tsplitthepodcastnetwork.com if you want to check them out. But they are also still in playtest mode, and presumably Wizards is going to be asking for feedback about all this stuff. But they said they wanted it to reach as many people as their initial 5th edition D&D Next playtest did. So we're going to talk about those today, and we're going to talk about the sort of the implications of that. There's a ton of material. The Mystic in particular is 28 pages of rules. So we're not going to be able to dive into every single aspect of these things, but you should definitely check them out. And I encourage everybody to, if you can, maybe even give it a try at your table. Why don't we start with the Artificer first? So Unearthed Arcana, we've got the Artificer here. Artificer was part of 3rd edition lore when Eberron came out. There was a version in 4th edition. This version seems very similar in flavor, right? They're inventors. They're people who understand magic items and craft magic items really well. And you have two archetypes for the Artificer, an alchemist and a gunsmith. And, the gunsmith is using a big arcane cannon, and the alchemist is throwing chemicals around, lighting fires, throwing acid, that kind of thing. So let's dive right in. Dan Dillon, what did you think of the Artificer?
So I will preface this with I haven't actually gotten the chance to play with an Artificer practically yet. And one thing I've learned throughout this Unearthed Arcana thing and, just gaming in general is that experience is always going to top impression, because there's a lot of things that didn't necessarily sit well with me. But then when I got my hands on them, something clicked and I realized what was actually going on. That said, my impression of the Artificer is really high. I like what I'm seeing there, and I love the two different flavors that they've presented us in the archetypes. So I usually don't care for too much in the way of technology or gunpowder in my fantasy gaming. There's a couple notable exceptions with things like Spelljammer. You have the GIF, the big hippo guys with the wheel lock pistols. And, I remember my experience playing Spelljammer. We had people who were mining asteroids for the stuff to make smoke powder. So I like having the option to inject that stuff, but I don't necessarily like it to be ubiquitous, which is why I love that they tied it into the Artificer class.
That's very true. It is great to see some of these more ubiquitous themes tied into the Artificer then, because it helps make the Artificer a little more universal, right? Which is great. Pulls it beyond Eberron and also says well, maybe there's not a place for a gunsmith in this world, but an alchemist would work. The DMs have the option to still bring in the Artificer in one form or another, which I think is really nice. What about you, Teos? What did you think of the Artificer?
So we should probably say that these versions are kind of the previous versions, right? That
Yes.
are now released. So they're what we've seen last. If you stayed current on the Unearthed Arcana articles, these are not a new iteration.
Right.
Though some of the discussion says that there will be another phase. This is sort of phase 1 release on the guild. There'll be a phase 2 where then they'll fine-tune it further. And I do want to talk about that phase 2 because it's really exciting. But all right, the Artificer class. It's interesting to look at the Artificer and think of it against 4th edition, or think about early Eberron, which is the setting where the Artificer really took off. They're always a little different. I like that 4th edition had the means for an Artificer to really do things on the fly, and I thought that it created a lot of Eberron-like creativity, what you're looking for in a world of Eberron, the campaign setting, where there's a high level of magic and you can kind of just do things quickly, right? Attach an enchantment to someone's weapon and then things now happen and they're enhanced. And I thought 4E did that really brilliantly with the Artificer class. This is slightly different take, this ability of things like the second level ability, Wondrous Invention, where depending on your level, you can craft an item. And that's not a fast thing. That's a thing that you've been doing sort of off screen. And you can have really cool magic items that you can now use in play and represent sort of your artificing ability. And then you've got, the ability to infuse magic, which feels like these older versions I think it takes a minute. And you can bind a spell to an item, which kind of takes in that 4th edition and I think in 3rd edition version of that ability to attach something, which is kind of cool. Generally, I think these are really fun, creative classes. I think that there's so much you could want out of an Artificer based on previous editions, but I think that this is still that general concept of the ability to feel highly magical and capture that sort of Eberron spirit of things. I think they do that well.
Yeah, they did a great job of blending the just the base assumption that D&D is magic, right? And even in Eberron, where you have these sort of tech aspects, it's sort of magic punk, if that makes sense, right? It's not Steam, but it's that arcane twist on technology. So you have trains, but they're all powered by lightning elementals bound into little pyramids, So it does a great job at that. Things like the mechanical servant ability, where you can build almost like a warforged buddy, right?
A sort of summoned animal, but it's mechanical.
Yeah, it's a construct. Yeah, they have a lot going on in this class, and as maybe a little bit of a counterpoint to saying how much I like it, I wonder if maybe they don't have too many different themes mashed into one, and maybe that might be better split off as a separate archetype. But it's still relatively early days, and it's a whole class, so there's a lot to tinker with.
It's so hard to make classes, right? So this is sort of these 3 categories of sort of this magic infuser shaper, and then there's this alchemist, and then this gunsmith. And is that the best split? Does that capture play styles and what people want out of it, or do people want a mix of these abilities? But I don't know. It's always tough for me to know. And like you said, I think your point was really great, Dan, about you don't really know until you've played through this. And I have not played an Artificer either, and with any of the Unearthed Arcana versions. And so I'm curious, if you play an alchemist, how that really feels over time to be using these alchemical things. Because often these sort of use of disposables can be unrewarding. I played a 4th edition shaman where I spent all the gold I had in the campaign on 4th edition consumable magic. And at first it seemed really great, but those things do not level up well. No. And I found that very often, my action was being used on something that had just a really low effect. And so I wonder how well, these different alchemical formulas that you create to have with you, alchemist fire, chemical acid, healing, does this keep pace with what you're trying to do with the challenge level that you're in?
That is definitely a valid concern. I will say that it looks like they've accounted for that because the alchemical formulas, their effect does scale up sort of on the same pace as cantrips, thereabouts. Not exactly, but it's comparable. So 4th, 7th, 10th, that sort of thing. So they do have it taken into account. So this is almost like if you're playing the alchemist, this is like your cantrip option, right? Mm-hmm. So it looks like they've accounted for that, which is nice. That's kind of a basic thing for 5th edition at this point, with the new paradigm of how cantrips work as a spellcaster's sort of basic attack idea.
It is interesting, actually. It has more level up steps than cantrips normally do.
Yeah, I'm looking at that at the alchemical acid, certainly.
Yeah, so it's 3rd, 5th, 7th, 9th, 11th, 13th. So it does level up fairly often.
I mean, maybe that's to offset the fact that you don't get a lot of big damaging spells as an artificer. You only get spells up to 4th level, and there are a lot of transmutation kind of things. But the other thing I wonder about the alchemist is when I look at the gunsmith, I think, wow, this gunsmith is very powerful.
It seems that way, doesn't it?
Yes. Yeah. And it seems like as you level up your damage that you can do with your cannon and the shapes you can make with your cannon, and the damage types begin to vary, right? So you can create a big, cone or a line, or, by the time you hit 17th level, you're shooting mini fireballs all over the place, basically.
And you have 40 rounds of ammunition at the end of a long rest, and then you get 10 for each short rest, which is a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, and do those stay then? Are like, if you take a week off between adventures, then do you have, 280 rounds plus however many short rests you took worth of ammunition?
So when you tell the DM, we sleep again. Yeah. We sleep another time.
That's right.
I have 120 rounds.
Will you turn in days of downtime for ammunition? So it looks interesting though, and it's got the return of like the Tanglefoot bag and the Thunderstone in the Alchemist, which makes it seem really fun.
Which makes me happy. I miss Tanglefoot bags.
That's true.
I can't tell you how cool it is watching your party fight a large dragon who's soaring overhead and being all intimidating and dragon-like and, raking them with fire or lightning or whatever. And then one of them is just like, oh, hey, I'll huck a Tanglefoot bag at it. And the dragon's massive dexterity saving throw fails, and now a reflex at the time. And, oh, well, it's gummed up now, so I guess it can't fly.
Yeah.
And it plows a furrow in the dirt.
Yeah, I've seen that kind of thing. I think 3rd edition was particularly good at really long odds, but it could just fall your way, right? We did a thing once in an interactive where this dragon had clearly beaten us up and it was going to get away. And this guy had one shot on a wand, one charge on a wand of, I think it was suggestion. And so he had it land. And that was just the timing we needed to all just beat up on it. And there was no way we would have beaten it otherwise, right? But now you have legendary saving throws you can automate and things like that. So it's a lot harder to have those kinds of things because just 5th edition is just constructed differently, right?
Right.
But yeah, I miss those kinds of wild odds.
Yeah, I remember monks leaping into the air and, stun punching dragons and things like that.
Yeah. I do love the names Thunder Cannon and the different names of abilities like Thundermonger.
Yeah, it helps it feel less like a gun, too, and more like a magical invention, which I think is important for the flavor of the Artificer.
It feels a bit mad scientist.
Yep.
They've captured really nicely that idea of a kind of crazy explorer or tinkerer, that kind of neat And I think the 5th edition needs more of that here and there, right? That you can do that.
Yeah.
They dipped the toe in the pond with the rock gnomes. Are they the ones who could build the little clockwork dealies?
Right. Yeah,
and it's cool to see them giving a little more support for that side of things, which really just wasn't there yet, and all things in time essentially. But it's cool to see them moving in that direction. Yeah. And I think you brought up a good point with the. There's still a few things missing or unclear with these, because remember, they are still like in a couple of these cases. Like I'm pretty sure the Artificer is still in. This is its first draft, right?
So I think there were a few levels in the very first Eberron Unearthed Arcana. Like the very first Unearthed Arcana was Eberron. Okay. And I think there were a few levels. Now I'm looking that up though.
No, you're right. They definitely had one in there first. So this I guess we'll call this a second draft, but it's way a much fuller draft.
One thing I like about the balance of things here is how the spell list. So you have 4 levels of spells, first through 4th level spells. And you don't get a ton of them. You have no spells until 3rd level, and then you get 2 first level spells. And then at 7th, you get 2 second level spells, and so on. So it's a slow spell casting progression, but it's not terrible. And the spells tend to be more utilitarian, which then balances well with how the class features are more aggressive attack things. So 4th level spells are Arcane Eye and Death Ward, Fabricate, Freedom of Movement, Layman's Secret Chest, Mordecai's Faithful Hound, Private Sanctum, things like that are more useful, sometimes defensive. 3rd level are things like Fly and Blink and Revivify. So, and you immediately thinking through that list, I'm like, oh yeah, you can really flavor all of these as magical, alchemical construct things, right?
That is exactly what I was just thinking. We have like Autoluke's Resilient Sphere, a little force field projector thing, and Revivify. You could have a little defibrillator pack, or you could just really play with a lot of these.
And I love playing that, both this and of course the Mystic, but this one also made me think of how I played a character for one of the Extra Life games I was fortunate to do, and I did a Warforged and tried to kind of have a lot of my powers seem to kind of come out of me. And I played a couple of Warforged of that kind of nature, and this is just perfect for like a Warforged, where these spells and even your class features are sort of mechanically or alchemically coming out of you, right? It's just perfect.
Yeah, definitely.
So I did just look up that old Unearthed Arcana article, and this is the first Artificer, because that one was a wizard tradition. It wasn't even its own class yet. Yeah.
Right, their first take at it was a wizard tradition. And so the cool thing that's going on right now is with these being on the DM's Guild, that's their stab at getting this out to a broader active playtest audience rather than just people who follow the Unearthed Arcana articles that pop up. That says to me that they're really pushing these ideas, right? That these ideas have gotten a lot of purchase, have tested well so far in feedback, and they're pushing for that broader audience to start getting some of those refinements like, hey, the Arcane magazine doesn't have a maximum, so can I just bank this stuff over the month of downtime? Because I don't think it says anything about them going away or anything like that.
Right.
So.
Yeah, it doesn't.
Did the two of you happen to see the interview of Mike Merles that Todd Kenrick did on his Dungeon Life YouTube show?
I did, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So that had something that's, information that goes beyond the official Unearthed Arcana announcement on their website. What was really kind of interesting about this, and because at first I was like, well, what's the difference between a nicely constructed web page where you just show me the latest version and having on the guild, like, why do I care? And so Mike broke out kind of 2 things that make it really different. Beyond just like, it's a single place for updates, we can push updates too. The first was that already now in what they're calling phase 1, when it's up on the guild, you can now use it for guild content.
Yes.
So you could refer to an NPC as an Artificer or a Mystic. You can create a supplement that is new Mystic Sonic powers, or a new Artificer alchemical creations, or a new subclass of the Artificer, right? So you can say, all these things we're talking about, you can say, well, therefore I'm going to make a different version and play off it, which is very cool and interesting.
Like the old Effigy Master from 3.5. I think that's screaming to be an Artificer specialty.
Oh.
I don't remember. What was that?
It was from Complete Arcane. Your whole gig was creating construct dudes, sort of like the Artificer does with its mechanical servant. And as you went up in levels, you could make bigger, more like you could make, construct trolls that would run around with you and do that. So, yeah.
So that idea of enabling creation is very interesting, and could be especially interesting if they choose this model later for spells or, I don't know, other types of rules, right? Like if they had like terrain or something like that, that could be really interesting. Or traps, let's say, that'd be a fun one.
Oh, yeah.
Then the other thing they said, and he said the next iteration, no timeline, but whenever phase 2 is released. Phase 1 is sort of, it's solid, you can build off of it, but it's not permanent. There are definitely going to be changes, and it's not necessarily balanced. Then in phase 2, this next iteration, it's available and valid for Adventurers League play.
That's exciting.
And that's a big, okay, now I get kind of why you're trying to change things up in your approach. Because to me, like, that's the essence of playtesting, right? When you really get people to not just read over it, but play through it at tables with other people in a setting that has, as Adventurers League does, a very stable rules base, right? It's very official and it's adjudicated. It's not full of house rules. It's adjudicated in a fairly common way across tables. Now, a single convention, you might play, 7 tables, if not more, and all those people are seeing how it plays and you're seeing how it plays. That's really cool. It's true live playtesting.
Yeah, that I thought was the most exciting of all the announcements because, like you said, that's just a built-in gigantic audience. And I talk with various Adventurers League folk from table GMs up to Robert Aducci, who it's pretty big wig in the whole thing. And I hear constantly, when are we going to be able to play a Mystic? When is this going to be AL legal? Previously, all we could say was, well, not until it hits a book, right? Now that's getting shaken right the heck up, and you're going to be able to get that out there and just spread that amongst the pretty widespread organized play network. That's a really smart way to get a lot of play tests and feedback, I think.
Yeah, because that's the way a lot of people play, and it's the way a lot of people only play. They only play Adventurers League. So if you want them to play test things, they need to be Adventurers League legal, which I think is really great. So, and it is, I think it will be, right, as many things in the Adventurers League can be for people who maybe don't read all things that they're supposed to. I'm sure some people will come to the table with other unearthed arcana things and be like, but it's okay to bring the Mystic. So, I pity the admins for that. But
that's always happening. One year when we were running the Dark Sun Organized Play campaign, there was a table where I think a dad sat down with 2 kids and they had Cleric Diva. So non-allowed race, Diva. Non-allowed class, Cleric. There are no clerics or gods on Atlas.
No clerics in Atlas.
I forget what the other kid was playing, but it was also divine and I think also an unsupported race. So it was just one of those things where you just, someone comes over and says, what do we do about this? I'm like, you let them have a great time, and at the end you explain to them that they, really should play with one of our pre-gens until they reach a dad and 2 kids have a great time.
There you go. And I'm sure that's all the dad wanted to do, right? It was like, we're just going to have fun. So unless his kids were real power gamers, really upset.
No, I think they were fairly young. So it's not a situation where I'm going to go, sorry, kids, you don't get to play. Like, no.
Right.
Why don't you go play Pathfinder, kids? Yeah, exactly. Hey everybody, James Introcaso here. Just wanted to take a quick break to let you know about this week's sponsor. That's right, this week's sponsor is Audible.com. Thank you so much for supporting the Tabletop Babble podcast. And for you, our listeners, you can go get a free audiobook and free 30-day trial of Audible's audiobook service over at audibletrial.com/DSPN. And one book I think you might like is Astrophysics for People in a Hurry by Neil deGrasse Tyson, and also narrated by Neil deGrasse Tyson. Check it out, or check out the hundreds of thousands of audiobooks over at audibletrial.com/DSPN. So, the Artificer, I think we've covered pretty well. Obviously, we could get in depth and talk about every single ability, but we have a massive class to cover here with the Mystic. So why don't we move on and talk a little bit about this class, the Mystic? It's got six different archetypes or subclasses called orders in this case with the Mystic. And the Mystic is the psionic class, and it's, if you've played 3rd edition or 4th edition, it's all of these psionic classes, sort of rolled into one. So there's, the Order of the Awakened, the Order of the Avatar, the Order of the Soul Knife. Some of these things might be familiar to people. Yeah. Obviously, we've kind of got to do some very high-level talk here. Why don't we talk about psionics in general first, sort of what their plan for psionics here is. Seems very familiar, seems, very similar to some D&D psionics. We've got talents, which for, to put it simply, are sort of psionic cantrips. And then various disciplines, and then you have psi points, and you have a limit to the number of psi points you can spend at once, which sort of cap out your power so you're not casting psionic meteor swarm, which is not an actual thing, just an example, before people
write that down.
Go crazy. Yeah. So that's sort of how it works. Very flexible kind of quote unquote spell casting, if you will, although very different in flavor, very different what you can do with it. And then some disciplines, or actually all disciplines, you can also focus in. So you can focus in one discipline at a time, and it gives you sort of this low level benefit that is always active, right? Maybe advantage on a certain type of skill check, or some sort of mini aura that affects allies or enemies or something like that. So those are sort of the basics of psionics. Teos, what do you think? Is this does this seem like a good way to do psionics? It seems very classic D&D psionics to me.
I think it's pretty fun. I got to play in another Extra Life game, a Mystic. And that was a really great experience. I think that was maybe the 2nd iteration of the rules that I played. It was definitely before this version, which has a lot more choices. Building it was a little complicated. It takes a while. There's a lot to consider and think through and funnel down to the choices you actually want to have for which disciplines, which talents, all of that. And there is a lot to manage as a character. So if you like having... And I like that D&D has a spread of classes in terms of how much complexity you want. So if you want, to sort of have a lot of power cards, or, pieces of paper with all of your different abilities and talents and so on out, this is a great class for that. And I enjoyed having a large repertoire of tricks that I could trigger differently than spells. That was very cool. I thought that the abilities I had felt psionic in nature, and they fit that kind of a sense of it, though it's a pretty wide breadth. I think similar to other versions of psionics across the years, you can choose to be more of what I would have, like in Dark Sun, would call a psychometabolist, right, where you're mind-body kind of thing versus a telekinesis type of approach. And so you can focus or you can keep it wide depending on how you play with it. And here with their new orders, you can even more carefully fine-tune that to feel like you're on martial attacks versus sort of pure psionics. It's pretty neat. I like it. Psionics have always had issues in previous editions, and so I think this is about as good as it's ever been.
Again, I feel like 5th edition benefited from its playtesting and everything, but also benefited from looking backwards at all of the other editions and saying, okay, what did people like? What was frustrating to DMs? What was frustrating to players? It feels like a very streamlined version of psionics, which is really nice. What about you, Dan? What do you think of the Mystic psionic casting?
So again, overall, I like a lot of what I'm seeing. Teos, you mentioned, the Dark Sun thing, and you got into the psychometabolism, psychokinesis, all that stuff. When I think of psionics, I go back to the 2nd edition Complete Psionics Handbook. That was kind of my introduction to it, and that's what I'm most steeped in as far as psionics goes. The 3rd edition Take It Psionics, I was never much of a fan. I felt like they never quite hit their stride for balance as far as that one went, and I saw just some an edition that is rife with combos and broken interactions, I think psionics was one of the worst offenders. And I haven't had the experience with it in fourth, so I can't speak to that. But instead of using things like powers as spells, which is sort of how third treated it, even though it used points to run it instead of slots, I like that we've gone back to this. Here's this discipline. Here's the things it can do, and you spend points to make it happen. It feels different, and that's what I want most out of a psionics system, because I think one of the things that Mike Merle says, it's an alternate magic system. And it has to feel different as opposed to just, I'm reskinning the detect thought spell. You know what I'm saying? And I think they managed that well here. Mm-hmm. But man, are there a lot of options. The complexity that is so true.
Yeah. And Dan, it might help to kind of, just for folks who haven't looked at it deeply, to kind of give an example, right? So one of the disciplines that you can choose is adaptive body. So this is that sort of psychometabolic idea of how you control your body in these mystic ways. So then with the choice of adaptive body, you get a number of point options, different sort of mini powers within this discipline that you could trigger. So you could spend 2 psionic points and use environmental adaptation as an action. You or a creature you touch ignores the effects of extreme heat or cold, but not cold or fire damage for the next hour. And you have several other things. You have a shield, you have, can gain resistance, and various different things like that. And the stronger it is, the more points it takes. And based on your level, you might only have so many points, and there's a maximum you can spend. So some things you just simply can't use until you become stronger. Right. You also have this focus. So if you choose to focus on adaptive body, you don't need to eat, breathe, or sleep. And you can get a long rest, doing light activity instead of actually being asleep. And so every discipline has this kind of combination of powers you can use and a focus. So it's a sort of a big package of things that you're signing up for. And as a kind of example, if you were a fifth level character, you would have 3 disciplines that you would know.
Yeah, so that's roughly 15 power options that you can choose from. I don't think they're all exactly 5 powers each, but that's pretty close. That's an awful lot to pick and choose from, right? And then here's the other thing. So these orders are definitely the subclasses of the Mystic, but these disciplines are not locked to those subclasses or orders. So some of them get bonuses, but you can pick from any orders list. There's no restriction on that. So, I mean, you could be an Order of the Awakened, which is all about telepathy, and you could take the one that lets you turn into bestial forms and grow claws if you wanted, if that is, how your concept was playing out. So the combinations are a little bit staggering. Mm-hmm. And this is absolutely for somebody who wants to dig in, read a bunch of material, and figure out what they want to do. By the same token, that gives me a little bit of pause, going back to what I said about 3rd edition psionics, where you had all kinds of crazy interactions and, I can combo this with that, and now I can just disintegrate everyone I see, right? And how is this going to play out? I think this is going to require just a heck of a lot of testing, which is why I'm looking forward to seeing it get into a broader market through Adventurers League and DM's Guild.
Yeah, I do like that flexibility you talked about, because one of the things that can happen is that one path becomes, one of their subclasses becomes so obviously superior, the more options you assign to that subclass, right? And then you find everybody is, 1 or 2 flavors of rogue and so on, right? And so the more that you can choose any of the disciplines, regardless of who you are, the less that you're going to have those sort of effects. You're still going to have stronger subclasses or not, but because the disciplines are a big part of what you're doing all the time, then maybe it won't. You'll see a little more diversity of what people will choose to play.
To that point, right, the multi-classing, right? So there's a million options within the Mystic class, but then there's, infinite options when you think about how many levels of Mystic you could take, and then take a couple levels of Fighter or Wizard or whatever, right? It really does require that level of testing to make sure that everything's kosher, and there's not going to be we're all taking one level of Mystic because we all want to be Soul Knives now or something like that. And I think one thing that is really interesting about this is when it gets into the Adventurers League, I will be interested to see a lot of mystics showing up at the table, right? And you could have a party of mystics, right? Who each sort of specializes in their own order, and you fulfill all of your various roles of tank and healer and that sort of thing, in addition to, having an awesome scion. So do you think that this class can kind of do everything well? Is it something that should be, I've seen people say that maybe they want more psionic classes split up. Like, is it too broad right now?
I would say it is probably the most omni-versatile class I've ever heard of. I think you can basically do just about anything with it. And I wonder if you can build a lot of that into a single character, so you have that that kind of stereotypical one character who has an answer for every obstacle.
At least my experience in playing, when I did the Extra Life game, I chose, my basic concept was to be around like a telekineticist. So mind bullets type things, but I chose a number of powers that were things like reactive reduction of damage, and sort of tanky type stuff as well, because I thought, part of the point of this thing is that you get to play through the experience, so having a little survivability is good. And as I was building, I recall thinking, I could really make a cool tank with this, which took me back mentally to 4th edition. And 4th edition was very interesting in its approach, where they would create classes and assign a power source to it. And the power sources could be kind of interesting things, and one of them was psionics. And so you had things like a battle mind. So the battle mind was a superb, super fun tank you could play, and you would do things like enter battle and immediately get all this damage resistance as you created this mental shield that protected you from blows, and you could compel targets to attack you and draw them towards you. It was very imaginative. I mean, you used all of 4E's kind of force movement and tactical bits were all explained as this sort of either mental compulsions or mind over matter type things. And it really, really worked. It was super fun. And I think you have that ability to do that, or maybe that's the approach they're going for here, is that idea that this power source of psionics can apply across roles. So if you're more of the roguey, dexterous fighter, well, you can explain that by being powered by psionics. Or if you want to be more of a tank, that can be powered by psionics. If you want to be more of a typical caster, then that's more of your telekinesis, mind bullets type things. And it's all explained by psionics. Is it too much? I don't know. I think that's a decision you've got to make up on high, whether you want to provide classes that are this meaty and this diverse and that require this much reading. Because there's someone can sit down and probably make a character in 10 minutes, but there's no way I, as a person who loves to look at every option and consider them all very carefully, will create a character in under an hour as a mystic. There's just no way.
It's not happening.
Yeah, definitely.
I will spend forever making this mystic, and this mystic is even more complicated than the last one that I made. So it would take me forever to consider all these options, and I'm not even the kind of person that tends to do, say a level 20 build. Just to do my level, say 1 to 3 thought process would take me for absolutely forever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, just as in case anybody out there listening hasn't checked it out yet, this version of the Mystic is 28 pages long. So bear in mind that contains things like the talents, which are sort of your cantrips, and then all of the different disciplines, which are your actual powers, which would kind of be the stand-in for your spell list, right? So there's a lot going on here, And I think you had a good point, James, with multiclassing. And it's important to call out that neither of these two classes we're talking about is currently tuned for multiclassing. Right. And there are a couple of issues that people have raised and that I've seen, like, a rogue might be really tempted to pick up a level or two of Artificer to get the Thunder Cannon, because otherwise that's a D8 ranged weapon with an alternate damage type that they don't otherwise have access to. Otherwise, rogues are stuck with, short bows and the like crossbows. Yeah,
or similarly, a level of soul knife to get that D8 finesse soul knife that you can pop out, right?
Swashbucklers might like that since they can make better use of the 2-weapon fighting rules than most.
Exactly.
Than most rogues. Yeah. So yeah, none of this is tuned for multi-classing yet. And my suspicion is, there's no official word on this, of course. My suspicion is by the time these hit Adventurers League for widespread playtests, I think they will be tuned a little bit better for multi-class. Because otherwise, I think there's some pretty obvious issues that you're just going to kind of throw into the wild. So I would expect some of that to be addressed before these hit widespread playtest.
Sure. And I think along those lines, one reason that the Mystic is so broad is maybe to avoid sort of I'm going to take a level of Scion and then I'll take a level of Soul Knife. And then, you know what I mean? Like maybe there's actually more combinations that you can come up with if you break this class into several other smaller, more specific classes. And also, maybe they were building these classes side by side and saw, these are all pretty similar. Like they all have sort of the same progression, and so let's do this. Would also make sense to me to keep it simple, and so you're not making pages and pages of rules, 80% of which are all the same, repeated over and over again.
That's a good point. If you want people to take multiple levels to get these abilities, you really want them taking it out of one class rather than dipping into multiple and getting whatever else each class grants at first level when you multi-class into it. Yeah. So that's an excellent point.
If you're an old school fan and played, AD&D Psionics and things like that, they do continue the process that they've done through the editions of using the original psionic powers. So things like Ego Whip, Insinuation, Psychic Blast, all of these different, Tower of Iron Will, those type of things, right? They all show up in one way or another in this document, which is always funny to see those names continue to show up. I don't know what has changed more than psionics across editions, but it's funny to see how we continue to evolve the game, but still like to use those same names.
Well, when you go back to the second edition version of it, they all sort of piggybacked off of that edition's ability check system. So that's very different, right? That it is nowadays. And I think I like that they kept a lot of the concepts and certainly the names, but then have updated them to the much more intuitive and streamlined 5th edition mechanic skeleton.
One of the few times that, little history thing, and one of the few times that I used the AD&D version of Psionics, because there weren't very many monsters that used it. So even if your players hit that, I think it was 1% chance to have Psionics, it was very rare that it would come up and play, but one of the creatures that did was Lolth. And so at the end of the Queen of the Demon Web Pits adventure, you face off against the Queen of Spiders. And Psionic combat, the way it was resolved is it took place essentially before any other combat. It was so super fast that it was very rare that it would last into the first round when other people act. So basically, this combat initiates, Lolth absolutely destroys the guy that had psionic talents. So basically, the start of the combat is this guy falls down to the ground with his head bleeding. She just wrecks him with, her far superior mastery of psionics. And then the rest of the combat began. It was very fun.
That's awesome. Well, I hope there's going to be more moments like that at the table now that we have the Mystic class. And it'll be really, really cool to see both the Mystic and the Artificer coming out at tables. I think both classes have the potential for lots and lots of fun, Artificer especially. So I can't wait. I actually really want to build an Artificer right now. Kobold Artificer, maybe? Who knows? We'll see.
Yeah. So Winter Fantasy next year, you're saying that you're going to make a Kobold Artificer. I'll make a Warforged Artificer. Dan, you're coming to Winter Fantasy, right?
I'm certainly thinking about it now.
Oh, Dan. It's so close to your home.
I know. I have really no excuse for not going. That's what I was thinking this past winter. I was like, oh, man, it's just up in Fort Wayne. Why am I not there? Yeah.
Great convention.
Well, you can join the Teos Abadia crew. So he's our fearless leader there at Winter Fantasy.
All right.
Mike Shea is the leader.
I'll be in touch, and we'll see if we can make this happen.
If Mike Shea is the leader, then we all know the real leader is Michelle Shea.
That is true. I didn't want to out him like that, but it is true. I did want to say one thing. I complained about this yesterday on Twitter. Not usually in the business of complaining, but one of the things that they talked about, why to have these on the guild was that they can push updates. And the major problem I have with the whole drive-through engine is that I never know what the latest version of some file is.
Yep.
Unless they delete the other versions. But whenever I look at my list of products, and I sent a couple of copies yesterday to Mike Merles in case you happen to notice my tweets and it helps in any way. But if I look at like my Ravenloft product page, I have two vastly differently named files, and nothing tells me which is the current one. And if I actually open them, I can't even tell which one's the better version or why. They're just sort of different.
Right.
And so, very important for something that truly needs to have version control is that if they're going to have the different versions stick around within the drive-through engine, they need to really assign some versioning to them. Or drive-through needs to actually, wouldn't it be great, like provide a date or something like that as part of the columns that they show when you make an order.
Yeah,
when there's
absolutely.
an update.
Well, and I have the same issue. Someone who is very good is Schwalbe Entertainment. Whenever they update a Shadow of the Demon Lord product, they're sure to name it V2 or have a date or something that lets you know, like, okay, this is the new version. Because sometimes it's as simple as, we added a couple periods and fixed a misspelling, and here you go. So yeah, I agree.
They need a little update notes section where they tell you what they fixed.
So
like,
hopefully
yeah,
they're
your
thinking
video
ahead
game
about
patches.
this if they want people to play test the latest version. But we'll see.
So let me ask you guys for a quick temperature check. What do you guys think, if you were in charge of D&D, would you want classes to be this complex?
So as much as I think it's definitely kind of a mixed blessing, or a double-edged sword, depending on how you like to look at it, I would be leery of making things with this level of complexity. I know that there's a certain population of gamers out there who wants that, and they want more fiddliness and a little more crunch and more options and more just variety in what they're able to do. Beyond using things like feat, multi-class, and description. But I feel like we're starting to tread toward the border of what 5th edition kind of brought to the gaming world, which, and feelings on that will vary. My feelings are that 5th edition was doing it right. So I personally, if I were in charge, I would be very leery of taking an approach such as this.
Yeah. I think if you had asked me before 5th edition came out, I would have said yes to that. Like that is what I thought I wanted. And, maybe it was just years of playing really complex games that when something a little more simple and streamlined came along, maybe it's just relief, right? Of, hey, this is great. But I really do love being able to get through combats quicker, cover more story in a session, and also as a DM, I feel more confident in my ability to cover, gray areas or areas that aren't covered at all in the book, or making things up on the fly without having to look in the book. Right. I can't tell you the number of times, especially when I was first playing, that I didn't know a rule, didn't want to take the time to look it up, made something up, and it was pretty close to what the actual rule was. There's a lot of things you're able to intuit. So I think my answer would be that this level of complexity, I think, is good for play testing. And it'll be interesting to see what people have to say about it now that they're very familiar with the base of 5th edition. Will they be comfortable with more complexity at the table? Because I'm fine with somebody building a complex character like a mystic or like an artificer. As long as they are able to play it quickly at the table, and as long as they can say, okay, use vernacular that a DM who hasn't played with a mystic is familiar, and say, all right, make a saving throw. Okay, this guy is pushed 10 feet by my mind powers, and he takes 6 force damage, right? Like,
there you go.
If we're able to resolve things like that, and it falls on the player to understand, I'm fine with it, as long as players can actually do that and aren't taking 20 minutes at the table to take their turn.
Yeah, I think
Absolutely.
my experience playing even a warlock has been along your lines, where I started thinking, hey, this complexity is just fantastic. And then as I actually play with having like so many choices, like I think for an Extra Life game, I had something like 11 spells, but I can only cast twice. And so looking at all those 11, what am I doing this round? It can really lock you up, especially if you have that sort of like perfectionist brain disease that some of us have. Yeah, I would tend to think that as much as I love options, these things should be vastly streamlined and reduced. or released over time, so we have at least more time to slowly work through them.
And on the lines of building a mystic, which you mentioned earlier, Teos, that you would have to spend an awful lot of time soaking in this document before you're even ready to build a character. I think this is one that is going to benefit greatly from quick builds. Like, hey, if you want to play a guy who's a telepath, take these. If you want to play a guy who blows stuff up with your mind, take these, right? I think those are going to be important for getting new people or people who don't, who have a very simple psionic dude concept, and just give them really quick options for, here, this is how you make that guy go.
Yeah, that's good, yeah.
Well, I think that is going to do it for this episode of Tabletop Babble. But before we go, Dan Dillon, where can people find you?
Sure. I'm on the Twitters at Dan_Dillon_1. I'm also on Facebook. I moderate a ridiculously massive 5th edition discussion group called Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition. I think we're over 91,000 members now.
Wow.
It's getting a little crazy. But yeah, so there's tons. We have people who have their finger on the pulse of all the 5th edition news, who are just watching the Twitter feeds and compiling everything about the Stream of Annihilation and have it ready to go at a second's notice. We have a lot of great discussion. We have a lot of intro for newbies, both players and DMs. It's great. So come on down and talk 5th edition.
Excellent.
And for sure, send a private message to Dan every day.
Absolutely. I am here for you.
He actually loves it when you tag him in posts. Yeah, so it's so good.
When every one of the 91,000 members does that every day.
All right, if somebody does that, I will be okay with it just to see what that looks like.
Challenge made. I'm not on Facebook, so I can't help you.
All right.
Where can people find you, though, Teos?
The coolest place to find me is at Origins, which is coming up in 2 weeks. Not my house. The coolest place that I would love to be found by you is at Origins. I'll be helping to run the D&D Open along with my Masters of Crime, Sean Merwin, and Sean Molly. And so that's the neatest place, and hopefully I'll see everybody there. I'm excited to play and run. And then otherwise, you can find me on Twitter at Alphastream.
So along those lines, I guess if we're going to talk conventions, I'm actually going to be at Origins this year as well. This will be my first Origins. And I'll be running quite a bit of D&D sessions for Kobold Press. Be running some Southlands adventures, so come and die in a tomb. That'll be fun. I'll also be at Gen Con and probably Gamehole Con at least this year.
I'm still trying to figure out what my rest of my con schedule will be. A lot of it depends on whether Wizards will provide official support for PAX. I usually do PAX West, but it's sounding really quiet there. So maybe it's going to be the typical thing they do where one year it's the most amazing support ever, and the next year they're not there at all. I'm not sure. We'll see. There's also HasCon, which maybe we'll see support. I'm not exactly sure what's going on, but I might go to that. And then there's the PAX Unplugged, so I really don't know what else I'm doing. This is the first year since 2005 that I won't be at Gen Con.
Oh, man.
It just got a little too complicated for me with the whole level of frustration around hotels and things like that. So our gaming group, I get together once per year with my buddies from the DC area where I used to live. And we're doing Origins this year instead of Gen Con as a sort of trial. So we'll see how it goes.
Gotcha.
I will have that I mentioned earlier, I don't remember if it was during the show or before the show when we were talking, but I keep updates at alphastream.org, my blog, and I will be reviewing an Undermountain adventure by Encoded Design, and I'm also going to be reviewing their Book of the Tarrasque. So both of those are really awesome, spoiler alert, but I'm excited to get into them in a little more depth.
Yes, yeah. And Hallister's Mad Maze, right? Isn't that what it is?
Mad Maze, yes.
That's it.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, thank you so much for joining me on Tabletop Babble today.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for having us on, man.
Man, that was a great interview. Those guys are both super smart, amazing game designers, way smarter than I am, so we'll be sure to have them back on the show. Really, really great stuff. Thank you so much to Dan and Teos. And now, it is time for me to read one of our 5-star reviews on iTunes. That's right, you can make me say anything you want. Put words in my mouth by going and leaving us a 5-star review on iTunes. It is a great way to help new people find the podcast. Even if you don't listen on iTunes, go make an iTunes iTunes account and leave us a review, because that's the way a lot of podcatching apps recommend their apps to people. They also use the iTunes algorithm. So go check that out. And here we go. Today's 5-star review is a good one. So Good It's Worth a Sonnet by Gray Author. So good it's worth a sonnet. Here we go. Very much enjoy his in-depth interviews, and he's had great subjects. I assume the he is me. Quickly became part of my feed. And because he reads these on air, here's a little poem. I just want a good RPG podcast that is interesting and fun to hear. But too many are produced and cheap and fast, and tend to come and go year after year. But one day 'twas a post on Google Plus that caused me to take note and listen. The host interviewed Mike Merles without fuss, with topics like design and conventions. So I subscribed to Tabletop Babble, listening to famed James Introcaso, talking to pros and to those that dabble, from old New York to that El Paso. This tabletop podcast is quite fine. To James, I toast with a goblet of wine. And I toast back to you, Gray Author. Thank you so much. This was really fun. And thank you for taking the time to leave a sonnet. Excellent to have you listening. Please go leave us a 5-star review. And before we go, I just want to take a quick moment to recommend some of the other great podcasts on the Don't Split the Podcast network. If you haven't been listening, our little family of gaming podcasts has been growing. We've got Venture Maidens, we've got Dames and Dragons, we've got Game O'Clock, we've got the DM's Deep Dive with Mike Shea. You'll love that podcast if you enjoy Tabletop Babble. There's lots and lots of awesome stuff out there, and today I want to talk specifically about How Spellbook Will Travel. It's a fantasy comedy radio play. It's scripted, so picture an actual play podcast without the dice rolling that's been scripted by Rudy and I to make a lot of jokes. Best way I can think to describe it is it's like if the Order of the Stick became a podcast. So anyway, check that out and check out all of the other great podcasts at don'tsplitthepodcastnetwork.com. Tabletop Babble is a show on that network that Rudy Basso and I founded together. Thank you so much to him. He is amazing. I could not do this without him. If you want to learn more about me, go to my Twitter at twitter.com/JamesIntrocaso or worldbuilderblog.com. That's my blog. Remember that RPGs are like sex. As long as everybody's having fun, you're doing it right.